standing right beside Oppenheimer Park, between Powell and Cordova. This is unceded Coast Salish territory. Oppenheimer Park has been a place for the First Nations for decades to gather, and in collaboration with the Carnegie Action Project. On May 9th, they evacuated Oppenheimer Park and housed hundreds of people. I've been following exactly where that camp has gone, and it has moved to Crab Park, where the Port Authority is keeping a close eye on the new Indigenous camp. There is a lot more work to do for finding housing, dealing with the mental health issues that are spilling out on the street and have been for decades, and especially dealing with Indigenous land rights and sharing space and urban Indigenous space, which there isn't enough of. I followed the story of Chrissy Brett. Chrissy was a spokesperson, an Indigenous woman. She had some very good points about when a problem is visible, there is incentive to solve it. But when a problem is hidden, or in the alleys, or in the streets, or in the SROs, or in a home with violence, the problem does not get addressed. Let's take a closer look at Oppenheimer Park, Crab Park, and how we share public space in Vancouver. I'm Molly Caron with Full Figure Media. Thank you for your attention. I'm here with Chrissy, and I'm on unceded Coast Salish territory. I'm noticing that Oppenheimer's empty. There's a new camp here on Portside at Crab Park. Chrissy, what is the strategy right now for having a foothold here at Crab Park?
I think it's just to continue to hold the line and invite all levels of government to come together with the community that has held up homeless communities across British Columbia and tent cities, and not through community donations and people who believe that in their own ways that they can step up and help participating in some of the trauma you see with people, homeless people just trying to survive. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's a group of kids and families getting together, building backpacks with supplies for homeless people. But in each and every one of those ways, they're making up for what Canada is failing to do, which is to take care of its own. So in a very colonial state, many people are left behind. Thousands and tens of thousands of people across Canada are homeless. And it seems that the government doesn't really care, and it has become an industry. You see people that cycle from homelessness to jail to treatment to mental health facilities and back on the street. And through all of these levels, we know that there are government employees and government contracts that are making a lot of money rather than solving the issue and working towards decriminalization and safe supply for everyone. You look in Spain, and 20 years ago, they decriminalized everything, and it's now at a place where, now that they've concentrated on treatment facilities and things that are good for people, the homeless crisis and the drug crisis has really turned around in 20 years. It's not like this homeless crisis has gone without the government ignoring affordable and social housing for over 20 years now. I've known people that worked for BC Housing that said if they didn't change their ways of not dealing with affordable and social housing 20 years ago, that they would be in this crisis today. And here we are. So I think that the government can't act surprised that this is the crisis it's facing. And then we add in fentanyl, and we add in mental health crisis. I mean, whatever replaced Riverview? I mean, there was talks of community-based sort of housing and supports for people, but nothing appeared or materialized. So
the government's complicit in not providing housing and turning all its attention to providing services that are Band-Aids. The mental health crisis has been as elephant in the room for a long time. Are the provincial government or the municipal government responding to you in any way? Are they cooperating?
No, we've had absolutely really no contact with municipal, provincial, or federal government other than I believe there was a notice to vacate Port Authority lands. We're just finishing our final draft of a notice of shared land occupation, where we propose that both Canada acknowledges that it's currently occupying unceded Coast Salish and in particular Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples territories, and we wish to have shared use of the land for urban Indigenous people and homeless Canadians who have been displaced from their own national connections and forgotten by its country, by its provinces, by its territories, and by its municipalities, and create a space where all levels of government can work with the community members who have already held up homeless communities long before the government has chosen to step in and work on actual solutions. And we demand that there be permanent solutions, not these temporary illusions that the government continuously creates.
So the urban environment is an important environment for everybody. There's the people who have been in the cycle of addiction and mental health neglect. This is a whole other realm, right? You're talking about sharing space with the spirit of
Housing people until there's actual permanent housing. In Seattle, San Francisco, and San Diego, they're looking towards more refugee-style camps while still continuing to push for more housing. And I think it's a mistake when people say, well, homeless people just need to wait until there's enough housing for everyone. Well, where exactly are they supposed to wait? You're supposed to take your tent down between 7 and 9 a.m., depending on which municipality you're in, or some archaic places like Vancouver have a zero camping policy that isn't in line with the Supreme Court ruling that people are allowed to shelter when there is no shelter space for them to go. And we have 2,333, which is an estimated number, definitely not an actual firm number, and we know it's just a trend. So when you look at that amount of people who are homeless, and that's not counting people that are couch surfing or living in their vehicles or overcrowded in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment or in reserve housing. So when you look at the larger picture of the need for social and affordable housing, it'll be a long time. So in these other cities, they've created refugee-style camps where there's actual tents that are built to live in, that are sturdy, not these summer weekend tents that are made just to go with the fam and go to the lake. These were definitely not made to live in. And actually put in running water, potable water immediately, bring in bathrooms and work on bringing in showers to spread the preventive disease. And then look at hydro. I mean, the first thing that they put into refugee camps is electricity because it brings normalcy and a bit of mental health and stability.
dignity.
Exactly. So, I mean, until Canada stops sticking its head in the sand and ignoring the fact that it's ignoring its homeless Canadians in our culture, we ensure that nobody's left behind, that we take care of the eldest, we take care of the sickest, we take care of the youngest, and make sure that everyone is fed and sheltered and taken care of. I look at the COVID crisis and the head physician that was talking about how First Nations need to be able to define how to protect themselves throughout this COVID crisis. And so you look at some of our nations, including the Nuuk Nation, which has closed its roads to anyone that is not from the area, except for essential services. I mean, Alert Bay, that was just hit with COVID and lost one of its elders that I know of. And so they talked about how necessary it is for people, First Nations people, to be able to take their own health and community into effect. So we look at the province's plan up until April 24th, we were assured by BC Housing that they were not going to house the most visible, they would house the most vulnerable. And in the end, the Premier and Public Safety and Solicitor General took it away from BC Housing and made it a public health order to ensure that the most visible, not the most vulnerable, were taken off of the streets of Vancouver and Victoria.
That's what happened at Oppenheimer, because it was such a spectacle and everyone saw it and were reacting to it.
And so if you're homeless on Hastings or if you're homeless in an alley, I guess you just don't matter. I mean, to me, BC Housing had created this vulnerability assessment tool to decide who was the most vulnerable and who needed housing the most, knowing that we don't and won't for a very long time have enough housing for everyone. So when they ignore a vulnerability assessment tool, which I believe many people at Oppenheimer could have been very close to the top of the list of that, there were many that don't. How is it an able-bodied male or female who has trauma and absolutely deserves a room is more important than, say, someone who is suffering cancer, missing limbs, or is dying of hepatitis on Hastings. I just don't understand. Well, I do understand. I mean, it's the colonial government. They've never been known to tell the truth. They've never been known to actually do what they say.
And so we're going to keep this in the media. We're going to air this on Co-op Radio and fullfiguremedia.com. Thank you, Chrissy. Keep us in the loop. People can support what's happening by making backpacks with good, healthy food and a headlamp and a blanket and a raincoat.
Absolutely. Tents and tarps, blankets, of course.
Maybe a bit of dog food, maybe?
Yes, dog food. Cat food is also helpful. We have a resident cat now.
And I think talking to their neighbors about it, like we're here in the city, we're sharing this land and we're settlers here. We need to show the respect due and we need to understand the colonial outcomes. This is reconciliation looks like as I stand in front of an upside down Canadian flag. I am always asking myself, what does reconciliation mean? And to me, it means listening, shutting up and listening. Thank you, Chrissy.
Thank you.